Boma was not always like this. Before her name became a curse in Ibadan City, she was just a wife, a woman struggling with her husband to survive. Her story began in a cramped one-room apartment on Oje Street, a neighborhood where life was measured by how far hunger could be pushed each day. The cracked walls smelled of dampness. The cement floor was cold and uneven, and the single window was too small to keep the heat out. That morning, the air was heavy and sticky, the kind of heat that clung to the skin like a curse. From that window, Boma watched Ibadan slowly wake up. Hawkers began to file into the street. A woman balanced a steaming pot of pap on her head, her voice slicing through the stillness. Hot cameloo, sugar day, milk day. Children in torn uniforms hurried along, their sandals slapping against the ground as mothers shouted after them. A boy dragged a wheelbarrow filled with firewood. The city had begun its noisy song. Inside the room, Boma tied her faded wrapper tightly around her waist. The fabric, once brightly patterned, had been washed to dullness. She carried a basin of soaked gari and placed it carefully before her husband Kunle. Kunle sat on a low stool, his back slightly bent from years of hard labor at the panel-beating workshop where he earned barely enough to survive. His battered work boots sat by his feet, their soles worn thin. His hands, darkened with grease and scars, fumbled with the shoelaces. "Boma," he muttered as he lifted the cup of gari to his lips. "That lion pot we day used on almost break. We need new one." She paused, watching him sip slowly. "And where I go see money for pot? You think, say, market day dash things?" Kunle gave a weak smile, more of resignation than comfort. "We go manage 'em. Maybe one customer go bring better work today." He was a good man, honest, patient. But good men didn't always bring money. Most evenings their soup was watery, stretched thin with okra or pumpkin leaves, with 2 tiny scraps of meat if luck was kind. On the worst nights, they survived on gari with groundnuts, or dipped stale bread in palm oil to quiet their stomachs. Boma was tired. Her face, once bright with youth, had grown weary. She had stopped wearing powder years ago, stopped caring for her hair, stopped buying new wrappers. Every piece of clothing she owned had come second-hand from Oje Market. Sometimes, when she went to Oje Market, she would catch herself staring at women like Adeola's wife. That woman always came in a car, her laughter rising above the noise as she bargained. Her wigs bounced, her bracelets jingled, and her wrapper sparkled as though woven with pride itself. She bought without counting. She lived without hunger. Boma wanted that life. She wanted to walk into a market and have traders rush to her, eager to serve. She wanted to cook soup without counting pepper seeds, without worrying if the fish seller would mock her for pricing too low. So when Kunle left for work that morning, his boots dragging across the rough cement floor, Boma picked up her woven market basket. Her shopping list was short dried fish, pepper, maybe scent leaves if the little money she had could stretch far enough. The sun was already hot as she joined the crowd heading toward Oje Market. The city pulsed with life. Hawkers balanced oranges, groundnuts, and bananas on their heads, their voices clashing as they shouted prices. Downfall buses screeched, their conductors leaning out to call passengers. Boda riders weaved recklessly through the crowd, horns blaring. Oje Market itself was a living, breathing thing. Wrappers in bright colours hung like flags. Goats bleated, chickens flapped, traders argued, and customers bargained with voices sharp as knives. Boma moved slowly through the chaos, her eyes darting to every price tag. She counted every kobo twice before daring to part with it. She stopped at a stall where a young woman with tribal marks on her cheeks was arranging dried fish, their sharp smell filling the air. "Madam, this one, 1,200, the woman said, holding up a large piece. Boma frowned. "Ah, no, 800 I fit pay." The seller laughed, shaking her head. "Auntie, fish don't cost if you know by now, another person go carry 'em." They went back and forth, voices rising and falling like a drumbeat. Then, in the middle of her bargaining, Boma felt it, a whisper brushing against her ear. "Daughter," her heart jumped. She turned quickly. An old woman stood behind her, bent and wrinkled, her eyes sharp beneath heavy lids. In her hand was a small calabash, polished and dark. "Mama, you did call me?" Boma asked, unsettled. The old woman did not answer with questions. Instead, she pressed the calabash into Boma's hands. It was warm, strangely warm, as if it had been sitting in the sun, though no fire was near. "Your wealth is sleeping beside you," the old woman said softly. Boma's eyes widened. "Mama, I no understand. Wetin be this?" But the woman had already turned away. Her bent body moved surprisingly fast, swallowed by the crowd of wrappers, baskets, and noise. Boma stood frozen, staring at the calabash in her hand. Her palms tingled where it touched her skin. She felt a shiver despite the heat. She did not know it then, but she had just stepped onto a road that would never close. At first, Boma tried to laugh it off. She slid the strange calabash under the bed, telling herself it was nothing more than the trick of an old woman in the market. Maybe the woman was mad. Maybe it was a scam. But that very night, something changed. Boma woke up suddenly, her throat dry, her heart beating fast. At first, she thought it was the sound of rain, but when she sat up, her eyes froze on the corners of the room. They were there, 8 shadows, tall, thin, faceless. They stood completely still, their bodies stretching almost to the ceiling, not moving, not breathing, just watching her. Boma screamed and shook Kunle awake. "Kunle, Kunle, look!" she cried, pointing at the corners. He sat up quickly. rubbing his eyes. "What is it?" he asked, confused. Them people de here," she stammered. But when he looked, there was nothing. Only darkness and the weak glow of their kerosene lamp. Kunle pulled her close, sighing. "Boma, na stress they worry you. Sleep." But Boma knew what she had seen. The figures had been there, silently pressing against her chest with their presence. And as she lay back down, trembling, she could still feel their eyes. The days that followed only deepened her unease. The shadows returned every night. 8 of them, always 8. Sometimes they stood near the window, their heads tilted slightly as though listening. Other times they filled the corners, stretching longer than any human shape should. And then Kunle fell sick. At first, it was a cough, small and harmless. But soon his laughter disappeared, his steps grew unsteady, and his strong hands trembled when he tried to hold his hammer. His skin became pale, then patches of strange dark marks began crawling across his arms and chest. Boma watched helplessly as the man who had once carried their world on his back wasted away before her eyes. "Boma," he whispered one evening, lying on the mat, his voice hoarse. "Take care of yourself if anything happened." Tears blurred her vision. She clutched his hand, but it was cold, as if he was already halfway gone. Within weeks, he was buried. The neighbors shook their heads, whispering about how sudden it had all been. Some said maybe Kunle offended the gods. Others muttered about curses. Boma wept loudly at the graveside, tearing at her wrapper in grief. But inside her chest, she felt something else, stirring, something she could not name. Because the very next morning, her life began to change. A man who had owed Kunle money for months suddenly arrived at her door, begging forgiveness as he handed her the full amount. Another trader came, offering to give her goods on credit. By the end of the week, she held more money than she had seen in her entire life. At first, she was afraid to touch it. But hunger is a master stronger than fear. She spent it, and the more she spent, the more it came. Within 3 months, she had opened a small shop on Oje Market. Customers flocked to her like bees to honey. By 6 months, she had bought a car, a small Toyota. But to her, it was a palace on wheels. She no longer wore second-hand wrappers. Lace and gold fabrics now filled her trunk. She no longer avoided Adeola's wife at Oje Market. She shopped beside her, head high. Soon, she moved her shopping to Oje Market, where the rich bought imported goods. Traders there bowed to her as though she were royalty. People who had once pitied her now whispered her name with envy. "Boma the lucky widow," they said. But at night, the shadows never left. Every evening, as she returned home, she felt them waiting for her. And when she lay down, they came. 8 figures, always 8. They stood at her window, their heads brushing the ceiling. Sometimes, in the stillness, she heard faint breathing that was not her own. Other times, a sound like low laughter drifted through the room. One evening, as she dressed before her mirror, she froze. There, on her left shoulder, was a faint glowing mark. Round, curved, unmistakable, the exact shape of the calabash rim. Her scream filled the house. She clawed at her skin, desperate to peel it away, but the mark only glowed brighter. The neighbors knocked, asking if she was all right. She laughed weakly, hiding her trembling hands. But when the door shut, she sank to the floor, sobbing. The shadows had grown closer. She could feel them now, circling her, pressing against her chest like a weight. And deep inside, she knew one truth. They were waiting. Boma could not take it anymore. The nights had become unbearable. The 8 shadows were no longer content with standing in corners or by the window. They had begun to move. She would wake up to find one hovering by her bed, its faceless head leaning close to hers. Other times, she would hear a chorus of whispers in the darkness, voices she couldn't understand, but felt deep inside her bones. Her wealth grew, yes, but so did her terror. By day, she shopped at Oje Market, her head held high, her lace sparkling in the sunday. By night, she was a prisoner in her own home. The car she once drove with pride now felt like a coffin on wheels. The shop she ran with laughter felt like a shrine to her husband's death. The mark on her shoulder had spread too. Once a small circle, now it stretched like roots across her chest and down her arm, dark and glowing faintly in the mirror whenever she dared look. One night, she sat on the edge of her bed, clutching a bag stuffed with money. Sweat dripped down her face. Her breathing was shallow. She knew she couldn't stay any longer. If she stayed, they would finish her. So she fled. The streets of Ibadan were quiet as she started her car. Midnight air pressed cold against her skin, and the city seemed too still, as though it was watching her. She drove fast, desperate, her headlights cutting through the darkness. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. Away from Oke, away from the calabash, away from the whispers that had swallowed her life. For nearly half an hour, she sped down the lonely road. No other cars passed, no houses lined the way, no roadside sellers. Just endless tarmac and walls of darkness, pressing in on both sides. And then she saw them, the 8 figures. They stood in the middle of the road, bathed in the glow of her headlights. Tall, thin, faceless, perfectly still. Her hands shook on the wheel. She slammed the brakes, the tires screeching, her bag of money spilling open, naira notes scattering onto the floor. Her voice cracked as she screamed, "Take it! Take all of it! Just let me go!" Her heart pounded. She reached for the door, desperate to run, when a voice froze her blood. You can't take wealth from them and leave. They always collect what is theirs. The voice came from the back seat. Slowly, trembling, Boma turned her head. Kunle sat there. His face was pale, scarred, glowing faintly in the shadows. His lips curled into a smile that was not his own. Kunle, Boma whispered, her voice breaking. No, it can't be. The figures began to move. Not walking, not stepping, but melting. They slid across the road, shadows stretching, seeping into the car like black ink in water. The windows fogged. The air turned icy. Each breath that escaped her lips came out as a white cloud. She tried to scream, but her voice died in her throat. Then came the voice again, not Kunle's, not hers, but something deeper, layered, echoing. You fed us the living in exchange for gold, but gold is never enough. We do not want your money. We want the source. Boma clutched her chest as the mark on her shoulder burned. It spread like fire across her skin, crawling down her arms, across her stomach, up her neck. She scratched wildly, clawing at herself. But the burning only grew. Her skin cracked, split, turned black like charred plantain left too long in fire. Her eyes widened in terror, reflecting the faceless shadows that now pressed close. Please, she cried, her voice raw. Please, I beg, don't take me. I'll give you more. I'll give you anything. But the voices hissed in unison, chilling the air. It is not the money we want. It is you. Her scream tore through the car, swallowed instantly by the night. By morning, the traders at Oje Market gathered in shock. A car sat abandoned in the middle of the road, its doors closed, its windows misted from within. Inside was Boma, her body blackened, her skin cracked, her eyes hollow. Gasps rose as people drew back. Children clutched their mothers. Men muttered prayers under their breath. Slowly, the door creaked open. Boma stumbled out. Her movements were jerky, her voice hoarse. I killed him, she wailed. I killed my husband for money. I fed the spirits. I brought this curse. The market went silent. Women crossed themselves. Men shook their heads. Even the traders who once admired her wealth now stepped back, fear in their eyes. Boma staggered, her body twitching. Once, twice. Then she collapsed to the ground, her trembling body finally still. An uneasy quiet fell over Oje Market. People whispered, "This is what greed does. This is what happens when you take blood for wealth." And then, carried on the morning breeze, came the soft, mocking voice of the old woman who had given her the calabash. When you use another's life to build your wealth, you are building a house for death to live in. And sooner or later, death will come to collect the rent.